this doesn't send a chill up your back right now, you're probably going to get frostbite very shortly. In our research, once in a while we uncover something significant. Journalists call them bombshells because they completely change how you might see a story. We've never released an episode with 3 separate bombshells in a single investigation until now. What we have uncovered about Mark Carney not only validates the concerns millions of Canadians have had about his conflicts of interest, it now reveals a clear and undeniable pattern. Not that all paths lead to Brookfield. No. It's increasingly apparent that all paths lead to Mark Carney himself. Let's take a look.
Where there is at the heart of all of these projects, including in resources, provincial jurisdiction, including resources, where the federal government is catalyzing, helping to make the project happen through a tax incentive, through some other support, regulatory or other support. And at the core, there is a commercial business, a commercial project that is making a profit. It is fair, right, just, smart for Canadians to have a share directly of those profits. And that's what the fund is going to make possible. And this is a great thing for Canadians today and very much tomorrow, because it's going to spread the benefit over time.
So we're starting with the most recent piece of footage that we have in this video, and this is Mark Carney announcing his sovereign wealth fund. And analysts have reacted to this and talked about this and said that what this is probably going to be, since this is not a traditional sovereign wealth fund where you actually, use wealth to grow it, is that most likely this will be a fund that will backstop private investing. What does that mean? Well, what that essentially means is there's this term going around called de-risking. And what this means is that private investors don't really want to invest in Canada right now because it's a very risky place to invest in. Not only in terms of the legislative environment that we have, that Mark Carney and the Liberals will refuse to actually adjust, but it's a problem from an economic perspective. So why, as an investor, would you say, I'm going to pour billions and billions of dollars into Canada when there's a high likelihood that I will lose that money? Well, enter the sovereign wealth fund. What that can serve to do, and this is what analysts think that it will serve to do, is they will use taxpayer money to throw into this fund. In this case, Mark Carney says $25 billion, but Canadians, go ahead and throw all your money in here too, if you have any left. And what that will be serve to do is to say, hey, investors, come on in, invest billions and billions of dollars, and in order to de-risk it, we will make an agreement with you as thus. So you come in, you invest, you do your project, and if it all goes south and you lose your money, don't worry, because we will pay you back through this sovereign wealth fund. That's what that means. And the issue with that is that there actually is no risk anymore for the investor. There's this conversation that happens on Dragon's Den and all these other financial shows and Shark Tank and all this, when you hear about this, where they say, well, the investor's taking on all the risk. Well, in this case, the investor actually isn't taking on any risk. The only person or group of people that is taking on the risk in this scenario is the Canadian taxpayer. And we don't get to make a choice whatsoever as to what projects get done and who is selected to do them. So that's what this is talking about. So keep this in mind as we move backwards through time.
How do you view policy and politics intersecting with that?
Yeah, well, the first thing, and this is a crucial point, which goes to where is society going, and then how does it get expressed into policy and politics, right? Or through politics into policy.
Yeah.
So the core thing, so I've spent a lot of my time on this, both, obviously at Brookfield as an investor, but sort of pro bono in building out the system. Anyways, whatever, through the COP, whatever. By the way, don't price your services for free, because the demand tends to be more than your time. The core issue is that finance is a catalyst. So finance, and catalysts, I know enough chemistry, catalysts work if you have the underlying components, right?
Right.
Then they accelerate things. And the underlying components are policy, and then, of course, entrepreneurs and the innovation of the private sector. So if you don't have policy that's credible and is ramping up over time, then it's not going to be effective. But if you have any of that credibility, then finance pulls it forward. And that's part of what we've seen with the surge in renewable and clean energy investment, has helped to drive it.
If funding, which is now increasingly available, or capital, which is now increasingly available, is the second step and policy is the first,
Yeah.
does that mean that you may be seeing a path back to the public sector
Well,
for policy?
I do spend some time advising on what, again, pro bono, but advising on the types of policies that are going to have maximum impacts for investors.
So this is back in 2024, and this is where Mark Carney is casually talking to the interviewer about, and many people have seen this video, and a lot of people saw it during the election last year. But this is where he's talking about the fact that, listen, the best way to actually get money and get a return for investors is if you control policy, meaning legislation, regulation, guidelines, things that only governments can do. So he admits here, well, I spend a lot of time advising on policy. One of the people that he was advising at this point is Justin Trudeau. And he mentioned Brookfield. At this point, he is chair of Brookfield Asset Management, 2024. So he is saying, listen, in order to get a maximum return on your investors, get your policy in place first, and then it's actually safe to go and invest, and the policy can almost guarantee you a return on your investment if you're investing according to where you want the policy to actually be. And then the guy says, well, so if money comes later and policy needs to come first, are you going to go into public life again in order to actually change that policy so you can then reap the benefits of this? And he kindly, kind of swats that away. But make no mistake, it's 2024. Mark Carney would have definitely been thinking of how to exit Brookfield and enter into public life. This isn't something he made a decision on at the last minute in December of 2024 or when Justin Trudeau resigned in 2025. No way. He would have had all of his ducks in order for a long, long time before that. So that's that. Now, let's get into something else. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you a report, Scaling Up Private Finance for Clean Energy in Emerging and Developing Economies. This is by the IFC, International Finance Corporation, World Bank Group. And this is just to show you when this report was actually released. This was released in 2023, and you can see at the bottom there, International Finance Corporation, 2023, 2121 Pennsylvania Avenue. So why are we looking at this? Well, there's some interesting things in here. Let's take a look at the second paragraph here. Actions by all stakeholders, governments, high-income countries, development finance institutions, and private investors are needed to mobilize capital, aka money, for rapid clean energy transitions while expanding across to electricity and clean cooking fuels. To support international efforts in this process, the IEA and the IFC have joined forces to quantify the investments required to build modern clean energy systems and identify the policy actions and financial instruments that can deliver a major acceleration in private capital flows for the energy transition. This research also provides estimates of the quantity of concessional blended finance for the private sector that may be needed, supported by real-world case studies and insights. What does that mean? Well, I'll get to that after I read this. More complex projects involve more challenges, typically with a range of public-supported actions required to make the associated private investments bankable. They typically include high sunk costs and the need to address prior contractual commitments between high localities and countries with a heavy dependence on coal, such as those associated with existing coal mines and processing facilities. the phasing out of which is more complex than expending renewable generation capacity. And we skip down. While many projects require both equity and debt finance, they need different mixes of financing sources and instruments. More complex projects involving heavy sunk costs and social adjustment costs, isn't that an interesting term? Including but not limited to major write-offs from power plant retirements or restructuring on the end user side, will often require more public subsidies, equity, and concessional finance. So what is all this? So this is essentially a report that the IFC is putting out in how to raise lots of capital, how to raise lots of money. And they're really focusing on the clean energy transition. And what they're doing here is they're essentially saying, listen, if you're going to be investing into some of these projects, there's going to be a lot of costs that you just have to eat, right? A lot of costs that it's just going to be a very high risk that you're going to have to sink into this and you're going to have to absorb. And that's a problem. And this is where it says, in those cases, you're going to need public subsidies and you're going to need concessional financing. Basically, the public is going to have to concede some of this money in order to allow these projects to actually move forward. This is what, in a nutshell, this long report is saying, and it brings in different case studies, and it's talking about de-risking, and it's talking about all of these different things. And if this is all sounding a little all too familiar, there's a reason for that. Because if we go here, the report benefited from the guidance and feedback from a high-level advisory panel, which convened to review the report's planned design and key conclusions and messages. Now, you'll see all the members here, but you'll notice there's somebody here that's missing. This is the UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Who is this individual, you might ask? Ladies and gentlemen, the person that helped write this report to tell all of these companies what to do and how to raise finances and how to raise capital and how to get it from the governments around the world is none other than Mark Joseph Carney. This is Mark Carney advising the IFC while he is the UN Special Envoy, while he is the chair of Brookfield Asset Management, while he is advising Justin Trudeau. He's advising them what you need to do and how to structure your financing in order to make it nice and safe for all of the private equity firms out there to actually get projects built at minimal risk to themselves. And he's essentially saying, in order to minimize your risk, go and get public funding for it. And if you recall, when he's talking about the Sovereign Wealth Fund in 2026, he's talking about the exact same structure, except he's not the one that's in the private equity firm asking for money. He's the Prime Minister of Canada, and he's saying, hey everybody, go read that report. I have your money. I have your concessional financing right here. And I'm encouraging all the Canadians in my country to put money into that as well. That's what I'm doing. And if this doesn't send a chill up your back right now, you're probably going to get frostbite very shortly, because we're just getting started. So ladies and gentlemen, roughly a year after that report was released, this is an interesting announcement that came out. IFC, which is the same organization that put that report together, IFC announces that they're going to finance Brookfield's Bikaner solar power project to boost India's renewable energy capacity and support climate goals. This came out June 17, 2024. Isn't that interesting? Around the same time, Mark Carney was actually on that panel talking about policy influencing finance. And you can see here that they are pledging to invest $105 million. Here's another announcement that actually came out in November 17th of 2025. This one's fascinating as well. IFC, same organization, invest in Brookfield, again, to fund energy transition, sustainable solutions, and job creation in emerging markets. IFC will invest $100 million in Brookfield's Catalytic Transition Fund. IFC's investment comes with an additional envelope of up to $75 million, which will allow IFC to co-invest alongside the fund in future deals. The fund is anchored by $1 billion from leading climate investor Altera via its transformation fund. So that's strange, isn't it? Strange that in 2023, Mark Carney was advising the IFC in what to do and how to get money, and then 1 year later, Brookfield gets $100 million from the IFC and invested into a power plant that is going on in Africa there, and then less than a year after he gets made prime minister, they invest $100 million up to $175 million in the Catalytic Transition Fund. That's strange, but you may be saying, so what? Well, here's the question. Where'd they get that money? Well, I can't tell you where they got these exact dollars that they invested here, but I can tell you something else, and you're not going to like it. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is from Global Affairs Canada, Government of Canada. This is a project profile, and it's called Blended Climate Finance Program. Where have we seen that term before? Right in that IFC report. So, back in 2018, the Canadian government authorized $250 million to go to the IFC, International Finance Corporation. And this is a project that starts and ends between 2018 to 2043. And this is where it looks at the sector breakdown and policy markers and description and all of this. And this says this project supports the Blended Climate Finance Program, a partnership between the Government of Canada and the International Finance Corporation. It aims to support climate action by providing concessional financing to encourage the private sector to invest in climate mitigation and adaptation projects in developing countries that require concessional financing. So, the exact project that the IFC invested in 2024, in the same manner that they outlined in that report that Mark Carney actually helped them write, is in the same project here in 2018. So in 2018, IFC says, hey, Canadian government, we want $250 million. The Canadian government didn't go out and search for these people. The IFC came to them. And they said, here's a proposal. Give us $250 million. And they would have had their business case and their rationale there. And the Canadian government said, sure, no problem. Thank you, Justin Trudeau. And he hands them $250 million. And then 6 years later, after Mark Carney co-authors that and co-advises that report, he gets $100 million invested into a Brookfield project in a developing country. Blended finance. Is that chill rising now? Because it gets worse. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2017, the IFC approached the Canadian government and said, oh, by the way, we want $150 million as well. And we want this for a supporting renewable energy in Africa. And this goes on to talk about what that is. But the point is you have two separate investments coming from the IFC into Brookfield. You have over $400 million in just these two funding requests going to the IFC. You have Mark Carney advising the IFC of how to spend money and how to get money and what to do with it. And then it's only after he advises him that the IFC starts investing in Brookfield. Not once, but twice. Massive investments. And then Mark Carney has been advising Justin Trudeau this whole time on how to spend his money. And then Mark Carney decides, you know what, maybe the Conservatives are going to be winning the next election. all these policies that are working in my favor, they may actually come to backfire and hit my bank account. So maybe I have to actually get involved. So he does. He ends up winning. And now he's talking about a sovereign wealth fund to do exactly what he advised the IFC to go and ask governments for. Only he's now in the position to give these same organizations exactly what he told them to ask for. So this is crazy, folks. And this sent a chill up my spine the further we dug on this one. I can't even tell you. But the saying that all roads are leading to Brookfield, I think is wrong. I don't think that's right. I think it's all roads are leading to Mark Carney, because he has been setting things up for years. And he's been influencing not only Justin Trudeau and not only the government and the policies, but he's been influencing the private equity capital firms and venture capital firms that are around the world as well. And when you got them on your side and you give them the rule book of what to do and to go ask for public funds, and now you're the prime minister of a country who's authorizing billions of dollars in public funds to go out to partner with private equity firms on the promise that Canadians are going to get rich from it. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we understand exactly why Mark Carney ran. And I think it's time that we get serious in this country about Mark Carney's conflicts of interest, because they started a long time before he became Prime Minister of this country.